Hello, everyone. I am Ben Johnson, and this is the Perpetual Chess Podcast. Perpetual Chess is a weekly chess interview show with accomplished chess players, authors, personalities, and adult improvers where they discuss their lives, their careers, and share tips about how to improve at chess. For more information, go to perpetualchesspod.com. So without further ado, let's get to the show. Hi there, everyone. Just a few quick announcements before we get to an awesome adult improver interview with Alex Crompton. Number one, Harvard is doing a study on how chess players learn. If you're over the age of 50, you're eligible. As you guys know, I'm often saying I wish we had more data on this stuff. So this is not a paid advertisement. When someone reaches out and they're trying to advance the field in this area, I'm always happy to help out. So to be eligible for this study, you must be over the age of 50, an active member of the U.S. Chess Federation, and have played in a rated game since 2019. All that you do, if you do participate in the study, is a 30-minute virtual interview with Harvard researchers. So if you're interested in participating, just Google Harvard Chess Study, and you'll be able to register for it from their website. Announcement number two is that next week's interview will be a bit late. We're going to do a world championship recap, of course, and I have a grandmaster guest already lined up that I'm excited for, but we don't know exactly when the World Championship will end. So whereas normally Perpetual Chess comes out like clockwork on Tuesdays at 7 a.m. New York time, this one will be subject to the whims of when Magnus and Nepo finish their match. Whenever it's over, we will record probably the next day, and it'll be out shortly thereafter. And number three, just a reminder, you'll hear Alex and I talk about this, but again, there's not much World Championship talk other than Alex discussing a bit about how he has a bit of trouble relating to these elite players when he tries to follow the broadcast. But obviously, if you want the breaking news, listen to the bonus pods first, and please come back for this one later because it's a fun interview. So without further ado, let's get to it. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another Adult Improver edition of Perpetual Chess. Sorry, it has been a little bit longer in between Adult Improver interviews than usual. There is more art than science to the spacing of guests, and it was just worked out that way. But I'm excited for this one, and of course, we'll get you more of them soon. And for those who have not heard this format of interview, it's instead of interviewing a grandmaster or a distinguished author or content creator, our guests who are adult improvers may have been some of those things, but the main thing we're looking for is people who've made good strides and shared good learning ideas about chess. And our guest this week is a 30-year-old Queen's Gambit convert to chess. So I think this is going to be a good bit of sort of counter-programming to the World Championship, which is ongoing as we record this. There is a dull draw probably in progress, and will still be ongoing when this interview comes out a week later. But anyway, our guest was the first employee at a successful startup called Entrepreneurs First. And when he saw Queen's Gambit, got bitten by the chess bug. He wrote a great blog post summarizing sort of his learning experience, but basically he had a sort of familiar for many people, I believe, baptism by fire, where he initially was planning on challenging in this World Championship match, but then discovered that chess can be quite difficult. So he got very regimented very quickly about learning chess. And he's, I believe, about a year into his journey and rated about 1,500, both if you convert the ECF rating, as well as chess.com rapid. So not as far into his chess journey as a lot of the people that we interview, but I thought that that's why he would make a great guest, because he picked up chess and has been very regimented. And I was really impressed with all of the learning tools that he found along the way. And our guest is also a podcaster and an excellent writer and a language studier. So I'm curious to weave those things in as well. But first, let's welcome Alex Crompton to the show. Alex, how are you?
Hey, Ben. I'm really good. I am ticking off a bucket list item by being on this show, having listened to many, many episodes in the course of this year. So, yeah, it's really, really cool to talk to you.
Thanks. Well, it's always nice to interview a fellow podcaster because you're like, yeah, I have a whole studio at home. So I'm like, all right, let's do it. And we've got to give a shout out to Geert van der Velde of Chessable. You and I, he and I both came across your blog post. And Geert, and of course, I made a note. I was like, oh, I should interview Alex at some point. But Geert pinged me right away, and he was like, let's get Alex on How to Chess and Perpetual Chess. And How to Chess will be back. We have a bunch of interviews recorded, but we figured we'd do Perpetual Chess first. Since we do not have a bunch of interviews recording in Perpetual Chess. And of course, we will keep the ideas shared separate, but looking forward to hearing what you have to say. And now, Alex, before we dive into the adult improvement aspect, before we started recording, you were talking about how when the World Championship is ongoing, you sometimes find it a bit difficult to follow. And I feel like that may be relatable for a lot of people. So before we dive into that, could you expound on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, so I was trying to watch the Judith Polgar commentary live, and I think, one of the things that makes chess so interesting to play but so difficult to watch is just that you basically can't follow along with what the best people are actually doing unless you are them. Right. So I assume that there is always, even for Judith Polgar, some sort of margin of error between her thought process and, say, Magnus' process or whatever. And so, I'm watching the broadcast and they basically just reel off these lines in their head, like move, 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 obviously better. And it's completely impossible for me, given that I know the coordinates if I'm given a few seconds, but I just can't do that kind of calculation. Not visually, at least. So it's definitely really difficult to follow. Which I guess is why, we talked about it as well. People like Gotham have such a massive audience because he makes it feel like you can at least participate in some of the thought processes that really good players have.
Yeah, Levy does do an amazing job doing that. And as I mentioned to you again before we were recording, I think the best broadcast team for people rated, say, around Alex's level, 1,500 online or lower, is probably Jovanka Hauska, David Howell, and Kaya Snare, who do the coverage for Eurosport because they're used to presenting for a sports network, not necessarily just a chess show. I think they do the best job explaining the ideas. But I'll also tell you, Alex, it's funny that chess broadcasting has come a long way. So if you think it's incompatible now, or hard to decipher, you should have seen it 25 years ago. But totally understandable, and it's good that you're still interested in sort of the pageantry and the history of who's going to make history here. But as you say, sometimes the best thing to do is just watch a game recap of the presenter of your choice and get the key points.
I think it's there's a really interesting sort of difference in some sports for me. One is is it a spectator sport or is it a player sport? And I think I used to do a lot of something called Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, which is submission grappling. So it's a bit like wrestling, but it kind of keeps going until one person is either gonna essentially have a limb broken or get choked unconscious, and then that's who wins. And it's actually remarkably similar to chess in a sense that essentially when you watch the best people play or compete, you can't even really understand the sophistication of what they're doing because you can't see all the things that they avoided by a particular movement or a particular plan. And so I think that's one of the it's been one of the challenges for submission grappling as a sport to grow, but I think it's also probably one of the challenges for chess as a sport to grow is how do you make something that is hard as a spectator to actually understand feel really exciting. Whereas if you compare that with soccer or maybe to an extent American football suffers from this, I'm not sure. I can't get my head around it. But when you compare it to soccer, it's clear when someone does something really brilliant. It's amazingly obvious because it's just so visually spectacular. But yeah, I think that's one of the hardest things about chess is and other sports which are really fascinating to do. It's not necessarily as interesting to watch because you just can't, unless you really fully understand what makes it brilliant.
Yeah. Are you familiar with Josh Waitzkin? Did you come across him in your
Yeah,
year of cramming
I
chess?
I actually read his book. What is it? Art of
The Art of
Learning, I think.
Learning. Yeah.
Yeah, I read it a few years ago. I wasn't that convinced by his book, to be honest. I thought it was basically just like, I don't know. I thought it was I thought it was less content and more just like I'm a really smart guy, was the gist of the
Which he
book.
is. Yeah. Yeah, and for listeners who don't know, I mean, most listeners will probably have heard of Josh Waitzkin. He was an American prodigy from my generation, and the reason I mention him is because he transitioned to being a world-class Brazilian jiu-jitsu
Mm,
practitioner and wrote this book, The Art of Learning, about it. Which I mean, I'd give that book a 9 out of 10. I feel like anytime you're going to do like a X is like Y book, there's going to be some sort of tortured metaphors along the way.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
unavoidable. But as you say, he's a brilliant guy, and it's a very a very worthwhile read. The other point I wanted to highlight from what you were saying is that this quote by Grandmaster Rustam Kasimdzhanov, who previously was Fabiano Caruana's second, he said during the previous World Championship match that even when it comes to the preparation, he said it's like an iceberg, like 99% of what takes place doesn't see the light of day. Like you don't see all of the sort of battle within the battle. So it's pretty apt of you to pick up on that. And so that's true in the opening phase. But as you say, it's also true. It's also true more broadly. Like as we record, this is in the middle of game 4. And it looks like it was a Petrov for listeners who are, trying to think back. It was a Petrov, and Magnus, it's probably going to be a draw unless he pulls some magic or one of them pulls some magic or blunders. But basically, it looks like I can already see that people are going to be saying, why did Magnus go into this line? But, this might have been a very low probability outcome in terms of like what he expected. And like, it is what it is, and it's early in the match. But anyway, let's get to your adult improvement. So, I thought that it might be fun, since you wrote such an excellent piece and clearly put a lot of thought into it. I thought that it might be fun, Alex, if we begin by you reading the first 3 paragraphs of your essay, or the first 4 paragraphs. I guess I can just stop you, but let's set the stage with your first 4 paragraphs, ending with the one that begins after 500 blitz games. And I did warn you for this, so hopefully you have it queued up.
Yeah. Okay. So, like most people, late last year I watched The Queen's Gambit. And like most people, I made a chess.com account assuming I'd become the new Beth Harmon. Unfortunately, more than literally almost everyone, I sucked at chess. And at first, this was unsurprising. I only vaguely knew what the pieces did, and I didn't know more complicated rules like castling. But I'm a smart guy, cue my white male privilege. I thought if I had just brushed up on the rules and played a few games, I'd be beating Bobby Fischer in no time. And so I did. And in December, I played about 500 games of Blitz, which was around an hour a day. I used lockdown as my excuse. And what did I learn? I learned that I suck at chess, absolutely suck. I wasn't even bad for a beginner. I was one of the worst people in the world. After 500 Blitz games in December, my ELO rating was 328, which out of the regulars on chess.com, about 11 million people didn't even make 5th percentile, which means that 95% of the people who have played Blitz on chess.com were better than me. And worse still, I wasn't even improving. I was getting worse because 328 was on January 1st, which is after my sort of introductory month of Blitz. So, yeah, I guess I did actually want to sort of also just massively caveat this whole episode because I am without doubt the worst chess player, maybe not the worst person, but certainly the worst chess player to ever be on the podcast. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm also extrapolating from my learnings as a data point of 1, and with some hopefully exciting progress, but also like, yeah, I mean, it's like blind leading the blind, right? I'm genuinely not good at this game.
well, the reason, I mean, the reason what piqued my interest most in your blog post is how into the science of it you got, and you linked to a lot of articles. So while it's true that you're newer to chess than most of the adult improvers that I've interviewed, my hope is that even people like much further along in their chess adventure we'll be able to learn from this because, again, you took such a sort of systemic approach, and that's why I think this could be helpful for people. Most people listening probably will have been playing chess for longer than you have, whether or not they're at a higher competitive level. But I love the sort of scientific approach. So once you did realize, like, let's pick up the story from where that blog post leaves off, Alex. Once you did realize, okay, it turns out that I've got a long way to go, I guess we could put it that way. When did you become regimented? When did you say, okay, I got to stop just like sort of hacking around here, and I have to make some sort of plan?
Yeah, good question. I think it was when it was just sort of, it sort of dawned on me that, like, without a shadow of a doubt, I was just like really bad at the game, but also just it wasn't like clicking or something. I think you assume when you do something a lot that there'll be a moment when it just sort of like starts to organically fit together. And if anything, I was just getting worse. And so presumably I was just like developing lots of bad habits, et cetera, et cetera. And I think, really frankly, that just like massively affected my ego, because like obviously chess is like associated with intellectual capability, and I spent like certainly most of my adult life trying to, like most people, like, be successful in the world or whatever. And so to some degree, it made me just think, wow, if I like can't actually ever get good at this, does that just make me an idiot? And given that just playing loads of games doesn't make me better at all, I just decided that I had to take an active role in trying to get better, rather than just hoping that I would through playing loads of games. Probably sometime in January, I was just like, okay, well, let's figure out what to actually do.
And did you consider door number 2 and just saying, screw it, I'm not going to play?
Yeah, for sure. And actually, to be honest, I kind of already done that earlier in my life, because I remember we had like a chess set in my house when I was a kid, and I'd like played a few games and stuff with my parents, which is kind of like, I remember like roughly how the pieces moved. But I remember it's like one of those things where I pretty quickly realized that I was bad then. And so, I basically just decided I was like never going to play chess from the moment that I was a child. And so I think I just always in my head had this thing of like, I was just bad at that. And so, I kind of didn't want to quit again, really. And I think also I felt more empowered as an adult because I'd learn from other things strategies to get better at stuff. Whereas I think when you're a kid, you're just like, I'm not good at this, or I'm good at this. And you just kind of lean into the things that you're good at and lean out of the things you're bad at. Whereas as an adult, you can say like, hey, no, this is like a decision, and I'm going to decide to be good at this thing.
Excellent. All right. I mean, I want to follow up on that, but first we're going to take a quick break and hear from our sponsors. Listeners, we've got a new chess improvement focused sponsor. It is a mobile app called Chessvis. It has a unique approach to puzzles that helps you visualize. You solve puzzles in future positions by inputting it on the app. There's also blindfold chess that you can play blindfold against engines of different levels. There's a big opening explorer database, tons of cool features that you can check out. Most of the features are free, and advanced features are available for $3 a month, which can be discounted further if you get an annual or perpetual subscription. So if you're interested in checking it out, go to the website chessvis.com, and from there you'll see download links for iPhone or Android. And just give it a try and see if you like it. That's chessvis.com. Perpetual Chess is brought to you in part by chessmood.com. Chessmood was founded in 2018 by Grandmaster Avcik Grigorian. It's a chess education platform that gives you a structured path to work to improve your chess. For $29 a month, you get instant access to over 200 hours of Grandmaster prepared video content and includes openings, middle games, and end games. They also have an active online community where you can find training partners and fellow chess enthusiasts. Don't forget to check out their free content. They have a great blog where their grandmasters share their own thoughts on chess improvement. I get it delivered to my inbox. So to learn more about Chess Mood and what they offer, be sure to check out their website, chessmood.com. And we are back. So, Alex, as we left it, you had just said that you picked up from other fields. Now, having read your blog post, I have some guesses. But so, what fields did you feel like you could draw on when you rediscovered chess and said, "Okay, I'm going to make a go of this"?
Yeah. So the first thing for me was just language learning. I think it was actually, maybe it was a guest on your podcast or something, but someone kind of alerted me to the idea that chess was like a kind of almost like a spatial language. And I think there's a lot of things in language learning which have evolved over time, like really, really powerful tools and ideas which can be applied to chess. And so I think that was the kind of easiest starting point for me. So I mean, I can go into some of the kind of like, those comparisons if you like.
Let's go back to that later. For now, let's talk about. So once you did sort of say, okay, I'm gonna be more systematic about how I approach this. What were your first steps?
Yeah, okay. So I think the first thing was to try and understand, like, what is it that it actually means to be good at chess? So I basically probably just did some, like, if I remember correctly, some sort of like amateur Google scholaring, which, is like, what actually is a good chess player? Like, is that, because we all have these ideas in your head, right? Maybe they have a certain amounts of knowledge, maybe, what is it? I basically just wanted to understand, like, what actually makes people good or bad. And the sort of gist of that turned out to be, I guess, kind of disheartening in a sense, which is that, and I think someone pointed this out on your podcast before, but basically the better a chess player is, the more likely their first candidate move is to be good. And then with calculation, the quality of the move increases proportionally. And so it seems as if basically stronger chess players just intuit better moves to begin with, and then are able to, like, reason proportionally from there. And this probably also rhymed with some of my experience, because it seems like, and this is still true now, like, seems like basically, as someone who had basically never played chess before until I was 29, things like bullet and stuff, where I'm basically just playing on intuition really quickly, I just terrible at. And so the sort of longer the time control, the more the sort of calculation and reasoning seems to kind of subsidize my, like, naturally poor intuitions, if you like. So yeah, that was the kind of first thing I did, was just like, okay, what is it that makes people good and makes me bad? And it just turned out that I just have no intuitions about what good moves might be. So, you look at the board and you know that, like, e4 might be a good move, and to start with, and I just obviously didn't know that. And that applies in kind of all different kinds of contexts, whether it's like tactics or openings or whatever. Just have to, like, learn that from scratch, right?
Yeah. And I enjoyed reading you mention that in your blog, because it's something that does come up on the podcast a lot. I and the guests are often preaching, like, kind of below your level blitz, and especially bullet, but even blitz can be counterproductive. And I do always want to caveat that by, I fully endorse the fact that it's fun. And if you just want to have fun, like, by all means play blitz. But if you are working hard to improve, then, as Alex figured out, you often are just going to build bad habits. So you mentioned that you play mainly rapid. I don't believe you mentioned, like, how much time are you playing? 10-minute rapid, 15-minute rapid?
I did play the 15-10 on chess.com for a while.
Great.
And I recently started to move to I've recently moved to Lead Chess, so I think there was it 10-5 or something.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, maybe that's like another story. But basically, the reason I moved over, actually, funnily enough, was like less about time control and more just that I basically entered a tournament in September, and I found that I practiced a bunch of different things, but like it's a very different experience using a physical board. And as someone who learned entirely in 2D land, it was just like terrifying how strange it felt. And Lee Chess has like a really on mobile as well, has like a really nice like 3D ish chessboard. So yeah, I switched over to there and just go with whatever they call their rapid time controls.
Okay. Yeah, I mean Lee Chess, and also I love their playing interface. But you mentioned that this 3D thing, because I saw you wrote about it as well, and I haven't seen that feature. So could you explain a bit more like how it works? It's still on a screen, right? It's just so go on.
Yeah, so so chess.com has their 3D thing, which isn't on mobile to begin with, but also it's called real 3D is the thing that they have. And it's really annoying because it actually tries to make it look like a chessboard that's right in front of you, but obviously it being on a 2D screen, that just like is really actually just disorientating rather than anything else. Whereas Lee Chess, you can change, I think it's called board geometry or something. You can change the settings so that it's in 3D, and then once it's in 3D, they actually have like, I think it's the last piece set or whatever is basically the one that they use in all the tournaments here. So it's like the sort of plasticky looking ones, and so you can basically, which I decided to do, you can basically just set it up so that it looks like you're playing on the like at least the tournament boards that you get in the UK, which sounds ridiculous, but at least in my head, I think it gives me more of a sensation that like what I'm doing is going to translate better to when I have to play it over the board.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, go on.
I don't know if there's like, I don't know if anyone's like actually done much research on like 3D versus 2D chess, but I do think in many other contexts, you would be kind of surprised if at least like familiarity didn't benefit you, right? So like while it seems like a really like small thing, it seems odd to me that we basically don't just have it as like the default, given that, well, at least for people who want to play over the board.
Yeah, I think for people who came up in the dinosaur age and learn with chess sets, it's kind of easy to switch back and forth. But I've definitely heard a lot of people who learn chess online say, yeah, when I set up a set, suddenly I'm hanging pieces left and right.
Yeah.
And one thing I wanted to mention is, of course, on this podcast a long time ago, maybe year and a half, I don't know exactly how long, we ran ads for Squareoff, which is one of the companies that's making these physical boards, like computerized chess sets that you can interface with Lee Chess and other chess servers so that you can play on a physical board while you're still playing online. And I don't know how many other people signed up for Squareoff, but there have been extensive production delays. But I do hear that they're shipping soon. And of course, recent guest Tatya Abrahamian, who works with Bryght Labs and their product called Startup, they're working on a similar thing that may even beat Squareoff to delivery to my house. And these things, I think they already exist in forms where you can just buy them and get them too. But I do feel like this is fertile ground, and a lot of smart people are working on sort of improving the product of combining 3D real chess, like not just a 3D screen, but like a physical computerized chessboard with online. And that would set up a lot of sort of not just possibilities for, hobbyists like you and I, Alex, but like even, there could even be elite chess someday involving these sort of interfaces where it would be sort of more of a hybrid between like the endless debate about online professional chess as compared to professional. So I don't know if you have anything to add about that, Alex, but I just wanted to get that in for any listeners who've been wondering.
Yeah, I did have a look at those actually. But I think at least in the style that I ended up sort of practicing, it feels as if like speed is actually a huge component. And so I think from what I understand about those boards, they're really good if you want to kind of play games against people. But if you want to run through 500 tactics in 25 minutes, then like that's not what they're useful for yet. So like I think at least for me, it's probably like really useful for sort of game context. But there's so much like powerful software out there now for like tactics training and all the other stuff that that's like I guess why I didn't buy one, I suppose.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. That does make it more of a challenge for training. At minimum, you would want to save it for your harder puzzles. Definitely don't do puzzle rush tactics on one of those boards. So you recommend a lot of resources, a lot of books and Chessable courses that you came across. So what was the first thing you got, Alex, that you felt like, all right, this is what I need?
Okay, well, I guess the first thing I got that I thought this is what I need and turned out to absolutely not be true, which is a word of advice for any absolute beginners, is Woodpecker method. I found it like intellectually really well. So I read the Della Maza article that has been mentioned a bunch, and it basically kind of sort of rhymed with some of the intuition stuff that I'd seen people do in research, which is basically just like, if you're constantly hanging pieces all the time or can't see basic tactics, you can never win. And that made sense to me. And then I think I was listening to maybe one of your podcasts with, is it Neal Bruce? You did the Woodpecker method review, I think. And so it seemed like the sort of, like modern day descendant of that. And so I got the Woodpecker method on Chessable. I think that's the reason that I discovered Chessable. And it was just like insanely hard. And I was like, okay, I think I probably got 0 right on the easy section when I was going through.
I'm sure you're not alone.
And so I tried kind of going through again, and I found that really difficult. And I was maybe getting some because I'd like had some like lingering memory of the positions. But then after going through it twice, I think probably in January or February, the easy section, I just thought that, it was just crazy hard for me. I was like measuring whether or like how long it took for me to solve like N puzzles or whatever, because Chessable gives you that information at the end of your session. And it basically just turned out that like it was having no effect for me because it was just far too difficult. So I got tactics time instead, which is like basically super beginner puzzles. It's like mates in 1, mates in 2, win a piece by taking the defender, blah, 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 these kinds of things. And so that I found like, okay, this is like actually tractable now. Like it's possible that I could solve these given infinite time. And so maybe I can just get better at solving these. And so that was the first like set of puzzle books or set of puzzles where I felt like it sort of seemed to be the right level.
Cool. Yeah. And I know that Tim Brennan saw that you mentioned tactics time in your blog and was happy to see that. So shout out to Tim. Yeah, it's a great resource for newer players. And what kind of time were you putting in, Alex? Like, how many hours per day do you think?
I probably spent maybe between like anything from 20 minutes to say 45 minutes on doing puzzles in the first few months. But I think one of the things, and this is where some of the experience from learning languages came in, is basically anyone who hasn't used spaced repetition should just absolutely use spaced repetition for anything that they want to learn. It's like in almost any field, just documented to be the best way to like learn and retain stuff. And this is for tons of reasons. the fact that you're getting tested on things means that it's much better than if you're kind of like just reading something. Basically, testing is like one of the core components of eliciting memory. The like spacing effect is also means that you can just cram loads of stuff in, and so it's just super efficient compared with other methods of learning. But one of the big downsides of spaced repetition is that it can be kind of lumpy. So like anyone who's used Chessable or Anki or any of the other things, I used Anki for many years for languages. Well, you'll notice that basically, let's say you decide today I'm going to do an hour of puzzles. Well, spaced repetition is going to tell you that tomorrow you need to do an hour of puzzles as well, and pretty quickly you're going to have a bunch more stuff than you can do, and it's an absolute pain in the ass because because you can't stay on top of the workload that the spaced repetition system is supposed to be giving you. And so what's the point of the spaced repetition system if you can't stay on top of the workload? Because the whole point is that it's supposed to make life easier by spacing out how frequently you have to see things. And so basically what I found was that it's much better to sort of like orientate yourself on like the lower time bound. So like for me, that would be like 20 minutes a day or something, than on the higher time bound, because some days you'll get, even if you're stopping after 20 minutes every day, some days you'll end up doing 30, 40 minutes because of the way that like the spacing of the spacing algorithm means that stuff will clump up or whatever. And so so basically I aim for trying to do 20 minutes a day, but sometimes if it turns out that I did a load of problems one day and therefore it's set it to be a week in the future, it might all kind of come together in a perfect storm and mean that some days I have like significantly more than that to catch up on, kind of thing. So I was probably spending 20 to 45 minutes, but I quickly realized that it's way better to spend 20 minutes and then just let the algorithm fill the gap.
Nice.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think when we do a how to chess, we'll go into more detail about exactly which settings you prefer and stuff for using Chessable spaced repetition, because I know you did a lot of work on that. So was that the total amount of time you were spending per day? Like, what would you say is the average amount you spent per day on all things chess since you got into it, Alex?
Yeah, good question. I definitely was spending some more time. I was spending more useless time than that, it turned out. So given that I wasn't really... so basically I was spending some more time like learning some openings and also playing some games. And yeah, I mean, games, I sort of know from my own experience and from the data. There was a really interesting blog post a few weeks ago, which linked to in my blog, which basically just shows that like playing games doesn't make you better. So I knew that was useless, but it's just the fun bit, right? So why would you not do it? So I was probably playing a couple of games a game.
Against that, but anyway, go on.
I mean, at least for me, it didn't seem to be helping that much. And then I was also learning openings, but probably about the same amount that I was doing taxes. So in total, I was probably spending somewhere between like an hour to an hour and a half a day for the first few months at least. But I actually really, really regret learning openings. I know everyone tells you that you shouldn't in the beginning, but it's just basically I found like the course that I was doing was kind of interesting, but it was like more intellectually seductive than productive. And when I just played random things instead of the openings that I've learned, I spent a lot of time learning. I basically had exactly the same win rate percentages, and so at least for me, it just turned out that like openings were this way of trying to reduce the complexity of the game, and it turns out that you can't reduce the complexity of the game, right. At least at my level. And so so in total, I was probably spending like an hour to an hour and a half a day, but I would say like the only time that I could point to having been actually useful was probably like the 20 to 40 minutes on tactics.
Gotcha. Well, the wasted time still counts, but but I want to, and we'll get to what you said about openings because we have a Patreon listener question about that. But about the playing thing, a couple things. I mean, one thing is like clearly there's tons of anecdotes, which obviously anecdotes are only anecdotes, but there's tons of players who have learned by playing, Hikaru Nakamura, of course, being the most famous example. But the other thing is getting back to what you said about sort of the science of learning. Dr. Christopher Chabris, who's a cognitive scientist who's been on the podcast a couple of times, one of the times he recommended this book, Make It Stick, which is sort of like an overview of all the science behind learning that I recently read. And what they wrote echoes what you said about the importance of testing. And of course, that's sort of the model of Chessable with spaced repetition. But to me, playing is a form of a test as well. And in a sense, it's a purer form because you're getting the wide range of all phases of the game, both tactical positions and positions where there's nothing happening, and positions where you think there's a tactic, but there's not, and positions where you don't think there's a tactic, but there is. So to me, it's the ultimate test. But the thing is, it needs to feel serious. It needs to feel like a test. Right. So I think if you're just playing mindlessly and often, that's where it might not help your game. But that's why tournament chess, like Andrew Tang said when I interviewed him, tournament chess often can be like the biggest turbo booster, because once you jump through all these hoops to get to the place, and you're staring in the face of this like 6-year-old or whatever you don't want to lose to, like the stakes feel very high. So it, the chances of you assimilating whatever lessons are to be learned from that game are much greater than in an online game.
Right. I mean, in my first tournament, I lost. I blundered a mate in one to a 6-year-old who played the Alekhine, and because I had no idea what to play against the Alekhine and whatever. It happens. But exactly as you said, it's like burnt into my memory as something, which I'll never not understand how that happened. No, I think you make a really interesting point. I listened to that episode, and I think okay, so I suppose one thing is at least in the data that this guy pulled out of the Lichess database, one thing is it seems like some people are able to do that. So Hikaru Nakamura is kind of one of these outlier data points, but it seems like basically some people are able to learn from pattern assimilation through games really rapidly, but for most people, according to the Lichess data, it isn't correlated, at least in terms of number of games played versus span of time played. And so I think those people are the exception, not the rule. And maybe one of the things you talk about a lot on the podcast is kids versus adults, right? And there's a really interesting piece of research which looked at child versus adult pattern assimilation by and memory through in different situations. And so what happens in this study was basically they showed the kids a bunch of things, they showed adults a bunch of things, and then they asked them questions about those things afterwards. And it turned out that basically because adults use what in the chess world I think people call chunking, where they basically apply conceptual knowledge to the experience that they're having, it means that their memory of details which are deemed to be irrelevant outside the concept is lower. So if you see a load of faces and then I ask you afterwards something about the background in the room, you're not likely to have picked up on, you're much less likely to have picked up on that than say a child, because essentially as an adult, you're just constantly projecting all the concepts that you've learned onto the experience that you're having. Whereas as a child, you might have noticed that, actually that, the picture in the room is changing backwards and forwards every time between red and blue and red and blue and red and blue. And so essentially what's happening there is kids are learning through similarity and dissimilarity in series of objects or experiences, whereas adults tend to be applying the concepts to that experience. And so the fascinating thing is that if you then teach the kid the concept and say, look at these objects again, they then perform exactly as well as the adults do in the memory test. And so there is actually this basically interference of knowledge with adult learning, because basically as you get older, you have more like conceptual understanding, and you use that as a heuristic to shortcut through things. So like, I think that's why basically playing from games works for some people and not others, maybe, or is one of the reasons is basically because like in language, I guess another way to phrase it is like in language, if playing chess is like, as an adult, is like trying to learn a language and hoping to get better at chess. It's like trying to learn a language by talking to yourself. It's like you are literally just playing through all the concepts that you already have in your brain, as opposed and applying that conceptual understanding to the game that's in front of you. Whereas as a child, like you're much more able, maybe because you don't have some of the conceptual knowledge, to like appropriate the right distinctions between the feedback that you're getting. So it's like, yeah, I mean, I think you're right that there's some circumstances and some people where playing can be really beneficial. But I think for most adults, it's like learning a language by talking to yourself.
Yeah, and it gets to discussions of neuroplasticity and aging that are probably above my pay grade, because as I think of the anecdotes that I personally have gathered about people who've learned primarily by playing, I mean, Braden Laughlin, adult improver who I interviewed, he says he learned primarily by playing, also watching a lot of videos, but playing many hours a day. And he's gotten all the way up to like 2,200 blitz. He's made amazing progress. Listeners should definitely check out that interview if they didn't hear it. But he's also pretty young. He's like 22,
right.
So he's still has that neuroplasticity. I can't think of any examples of people who learn, say, 30 and older, who just say, I only played and I got really good.
Right.
So there may be something to that, but again, and even something like the Chess study, I mean, obviously we're going to be constrained because they can measure what people are doing on Chess,
right.
but they can't measure what they're doing away from Chess.
Right.
Are they playing tournaments? Are they reading books? Are they drinking? Are they, smoking weed, whatever it might be. Like how are they spending those other hours, and how is that interfacing with their chess progress? Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm just riffing, but I think there's a bunch of interesting stuff here around like. So my interpretation of the like adult child neuroplasticity thing is like maybe different to some of the things I've heard on your podcast before, which is like, it's clearly true that there are like differences in adult brains and child brains. But I think it's also, we basically know in most fields that like fluid intelligence like continues to peak beyond childhood, and fluid intelligence basically means the like combination of like your raw like processing speed of your brain and the like sort of conceptual understanding of your brain that can kind of make shortcuts for processing speed. And so I think like it's interesting because I think it's far too easy to say it's easier to learn stuff as a kid because you have, you're like peak neuroplasticity or like, maybe even peak processing speed or whatever it is, like it is when you're a kid. I actually think that's only true if you learn in a way that is basically dependent on those attributes rather than the attributes that you have as an adult. And I'll give you an example of where this really comes in language learning. So basically, if you learn Chinese or Japanese characters as a child, the way that you learn them is through their a combination of, well, it's basically rote memorization. So if you're in school in Japan or China, more or less you learn through just like, here's the character for this, you write it out. And so it takes, and you learn more or less also from conceptual simplicity to conceptual complexity, because if you're a child and you're 5, you are not going to learn the word for dilemma before you learn the word for shoe or whatever, right? And so what that means is that it takes kids roughly until they're an adult before they can actually kind of write out most of the characters that they're going to need as an adult to be able to read and write. Putting aside to the fact that there's like a massive literacy issue caused by mobile phones in Asia right now. What's interesting about that is, 15 years of rote memorization to learn in Japan, to learn roughly like 2,000 Chinese characters, which they use in their ranking system. Now, there's a guy called Heisig, I think James Heisig, who wrote this book called Remembering the Kanji, which is the kind of Japanese word for the Chinese characters. Basically, what he says is like, hey, if you just use memory palaces, which is this thing where you basically attribute a sort of like a part of a story to each subsection of the character, you can just piece together all these stories in your brain, and over time the stories will fade and the meaning of the characters will remain. And in this way, you can basically learn certainly the 2,000 Japanese characters that you need to know from a meaning perspective in the space of like 3 months. So, and I did this when I was at university, kind of out of curiosity. And so what? So why is that relevant? Well, it basically says, or the point of that story is that as an adult, the massive advantage that you have is that you don't need to go from conceptual simplicity to conceptual complexity. You can just start with like, what is the most logical, or what is the like best way, fastest way that I can learn this information, given that I already understand given that I already understand lots of things about the world. So for example, to make this really concrete, the character for dilemma in Japanese is a combination of the character for tree and the combination and the character for mouth. Now, like it's a really simple character, and so you, as long as you know the character for tree, which is really simple, the character for mouth, which is really simple, you now also know the character for or the word for dilemma in Japanese. And so, like as an adult, your ability to to learn that information in a different way than you would as a child, which suits your brain, i.e. through memory palacing, spaced repetition, whatever, is it's just there. And so for me, at least, the whole like child adult thing is kind of only relevant if you're trying to learn things like you would have learned them as a child. And if you just think about like, okay, like what's the most systematic way that I can learn this thing as an adult, like of course you're going to be better at children than learning. Like it seems crazy to me, the idea that like my 10-year-old self would have been better than me at learning anything. My 10-year-old self had like zero attention span, had like didn't know what most words meant, like had no sort of ability to like reason about complicated topics. And so the idea that the 10-year-old version of me, assuming given everything, could be better than me at learning something now, I just think is crazy. Like, yes, if we're performing some very specific tasks in some very specific way, but we just don't have to do that, right? We can learn in different ways.
Yeah,
sorry,
it's a great
rant.
point. No, it's a great point. And when I interviewed, Dr. Vishnu Srikumar, another adult improver and cognitive scientist, he subsequently wrote a blog post on Lichess. Shout out to Vishnu if you're listening. And he argued a lot of the same things, that the time component often gets overlooked. Like these kids are basically doing like total immersion in chess quite often.
Right.
So yes, they have more neuroplasticity, but if we were doing total immersion, especially again, maybe showing my biases, but especially when it comes to the competing in tournaments angle, I mean, they're playing at least often twice a month, like, and just like totally, totally enveloped by the experience. It's something that adults rarely can do.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, we're not going to settle these questions right here, right now. But I mean, I love hearing all of the research that you did about it. So Alex, I have a bunch of Patreon questions for you that we should dig into that I think will elicit a lot more sort of about concretely what you've done. But first, we're going to take one more break to hear from our sponsors. Perpetual Chess is brought to you in part by our old friends at Chessable.com. Hopefully you know by now about their proprietary move trainer technology that helps you remember tactical patterns as well as opening sequences. Whatever aspect of your game you're looking to work on, there is an excellent chance that Chessable has something for you to help. They're also constantly releasing new courses. In the pipeline currently, they've got a lifetime repertoire 1E4 from none other than Anish Giri. And they've got the Ginger GM, Simon Williams, soon to release a treatment of legendary Grandmaster Alexei Shirov's Fire on Board, plus so much more. So just be sure to always go to Chessable.com and take a look at what's new. Good news, listeners. According to aimchess.com, I'm now only behind on the clock 75% of the time in my Blitz games. That's actually huge progress for me. I'm going to keep working to bring it up, and I recommend you use aimchess.com to address whatever weaknesses you may have in your game, whether it be playing with the white or black pieces, a particular opening, or a particular phase of the game. They give tailored lessons for whatever their algorithm detects, and of course, their algorithm scrapes the games from the major chess playing sites themselves in order to tell you what you need. If you decide to subscribe to aimchess.com after checking it out, be sure to use the promo code Perpetual30. Details are in the show notes. Check out aimchess.com. Okay, and we are back, and we have a bunch of listener questions, many of them from Jack Russell. So shout out to Jack, who sent in some just a great list of questions that I'm just going to let Alex tackle one by one. And for anyone who has not listened to that much Perpetual Chess, I forgive you. And the way this works is people who donate via Patreon and support the show can submit questions for guests, whether they be newer experts of adult learning like Alex, newer to chess, I should say, or, grandmasters such as Daniel King and the many other authors and elite players that I'm privileged to talk to. So anyway, here is Jack's brief note and then question. So Jack says, I'm super excited to hear the interview with Alex. Like him, I came to chess a complete beginner at 47 exactly a year ago. I've had similar improvement, although not quite as dramatic, gaining around 400 points in various platforms and time controls, and now around 1450 Elite Chess Rapid. Unlike him, my approach has been very scattershot and random. And a whole year, and I'm still trying to figure out what a systematic approach would look like. Basically, I'm just trying everything my favorite podcast guests talk about, so I'm interested to hear more about his focused approach. I have a few questions. He says, feel free to pick one, but I think we'll tackle a bunch of them. So let's start with this one. This one goes back to openings. He says, your blog mentioned that you haven't spent much time studying openings. Do you find playing more system-based openings like the London or Caro-Kann with black to avoid helping to have that kind of study? Or if you could say a bit more about your approach or lack thereof to openings once you kind of arrived at one, Alex.
Yeah, so I don't play, as far as I'm aware, system-based openings. Right now, I've just been playing B3 as white, and
Geert's going to love you even more.
and knight F6 as black, and then a bit of whatever. Basically, the reasoning being, so when I started out, I learned on Chessable these opening courses called like My First Open, or I started to learn My First Opening Course for White. And I did think the openings that were picked in that were super interesting. But basically, after a while of learning these things, I just checked my win percentages on chess.com, and I realized that I was just winning more games with black when I hadn't learned any opening theory at all for black yet. And so I was like, what's going on here? And I think there's a couple of things I realized. One is just that, like, basically, I almost felt like so the openings in that book were like really aggressive, which is like really fun to play, but basically encourage at some point for you to like sacrifice and go for a checkmate. And me just like not really knowing what I was doing, I almost felt like the whole game was on a timer, which is like, I need to basically figure out how I can like sacrifice this piece and checkmate them while I'm down material. Otherwise, I'm just going to lose the game. And so it was just like, I basically just found that I was sort of getting into just a really weird mode of playing where I was like losing unless I was winning, if that makes sense. Like, and I would win some games with these like awesome feeling, checkmates where I was down loads of material, but I would lose equally as many games by just like, actually it turned out that it wasn't the right time to sack that piece. And I just couldn't tell the difference between those two things. And so given that I was just getting worse results with the stuff that I'd learned, I was like, okay, well, I'll just play a bunch of random things for, a couple of weeks and just see what happens. And it turned out that, basically my elo didn't change. And so lo and behold, it turns out that like what openings I was playing was not the reason that I was winning or losing. It was like other stuff. I think the other big change in my reasoning here was like I went to do my first tournament, and basically all the games where I got the openings that I'd prepped, I felt great, and I felt like I won because of the opening that I'd prepped. And then all the games where they played something random, like this kid who played the Alekhine against me, and I just basically blundered a 1-move checkmate, and within 10 moves or something. I kind of also just realized, I realized from that experience at least that it's super advantageous to just be not in anyone's book and then getting a game of chess, and not worrying about whether or not you can remember the 15th move of some sequence. And so I then thought about, okay, well, how do I do that? And I looked on Lichess, and I just basically made a list of some uncommon but sound beginnings, e.g. B3. And then I worked out how many moves it takes before you get into the almost zero probability of happening. I think less than 0.5% probability of happening, conditional on you playing all your moves. So I looked up how long it takes for the lines to get there. And I think it's basically 7 moves, conditional on you playing your moves. So after about 7 moves, with more or less any opening, you get out of, you get to the realm of less than 0.5% probability of that position occurring, based on the Lichess database for rapid games plus or maybe blitz games plus. And so I was like, I'm just investing all this time in learning stuff where basically the odds of me getting anything after move 7 is just almost zero. And so since then I just I picked some stuff that sounded fun. So I picked B3 because it's probably not in anyone's book. And also I'll get a game. And then I picked the Alekhine because that kid beat me with it, and the Benko course of Chessable. And then I set it to move 6 or 7, and then learned the quick starter, and then just forget about it.
That's great. Yeah. I think there's a lot to be admired about that approach. First of all, I love that you still incorporated some analytics, even when you're sort of looking for a way to not do openings, that it's still data driven in a sense. And I think if a lot of people below your level took a similar approach, they would come to a similar conclusion. And I do think B3 is a fantastic choice. I have to admit, I haven't studied Grandmaster Adiban's course, but my guess is that there's almost no traps Black can play. If you go B3,
right.
whether or not it's a known position. And by the way, what Alex was referring to with looking at the data for anyone who doesn't know how to do that, if you go to, for example, on Lichess, if you go to analyze your game, you look at the opening tree at the bottom, or you could also go to learn and then study and then input a game. And then you can filter for different ratings. So you can look for your rating level. So what Alex is describing is a way of seeing what moves are faced in practice. But even though Alex is at move 7, finding completely fresh positions, I think if you go B3 from a practical perspective, Black just can't make a threat really that soon. So basically you're on your own from move 1, which I do think has a lot of merit. Now for Black, my personal opinion, Alex, I mean, I admire the spirit. I personally wouldn't recommend the Alekhine. I might go with something like the Pierce or the Pribble, where you go D6 and C6 and knight B D7 and E5 or something like that.
Yeah.
Even the modern, shout out to Vieko at Chessable. But anyway, it's not that important. I endorse the overall sort of philosophy of, at least to get to your level, it's not that openings couldn't help, but there's an opportunity cost to anything you spend time on.
Yeah, exactly.
And as your data showed, it's not the best use.
I think the hard thing about it is if there's something that's so seductive about the idea that you can take this incredibly complex game and then turn it into, well, if I just memorize this stuff, then I'll win games. But the reality is that certainly, and if you look at the sort of grandmaster databases, it's true that 7 moves actually becomes many more moves, and you do have to have more memorization because people are more consistent in playing the most critical thing. But I just don't think, certainly until you're at a very high level, you can reduce the complexity to, I need to memorize these moves, because you have to be able to punish deviations, and punishing deviations comes from understanding what the opportunities are in the game to begin with. And so at least for me, it was I really, really wanted to be able to just go and beat all my friends by having learned the like special magic opening. But then when they do something that I wasn't in the course that I did, and it's not in the course that I did because it's a stupid move, but it's not a stupid move for a reason that I can punish, then it doesn't matter that I learn all of this stuff, right? It's just like, and so, yeah, I think like trying to escape the fact that you're actually basically, unless you're at a very, very high level, you're just going to have to be able to play chess well. Like, obviously you have to do that at a high level, but like, it's just like, you're going to win games because you can play chess well, not because you've memorized like 14 moves deep on the most critical line. Like, you're never going to get it. You're just never going to get it, like statistically. So yeah, just like worry about playing chess well. And it took me like until my first tournament to realize that that's what I needed to do, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah. And I do want to highlight one important point, Alex. So I 90% agree with you, maybe even 100%. But for people like Jack who are listening, I do just want to stress that what we're saying about avoiding memorizing openings, say below 1500, doesn't mean that you should ignore opening principles. It's very important to build the foundation, and of course, books like Logical Chess Move by Move are really good about drilling that in, or if you prefer a video series, something like Naroditsky or John Bartholomew's Climbing the Rating Ladders and John Bartholomew's Chess Fundamentals. I mean, if you look for something opening oriented in those videos, I mean, they definitely will get you the sort of fundamentals you need. But what I've observed in players around your guys' level and below is a strong propensity to disobey opening principles. Let's say there's some sort of disconnect where, like, if you ask someone, different people tout different, like, different chess fundamentals. But let's say, like, what Chess Steps calls, the golden rules: move your center pawns, bring out your knights and bishops, and castle your king, for example. Like, if you ask someone, what are the opening golden rules, there are people rated 1,000 online who could immediately say that, but then they're moving a side pawn, or more commonly, the big one is moving the same piece twice. Like, they know that they're not supposed to move the same piece twice in theory, but in practice, they see a way to threaten a fork that doesn't do anything else. And they make the move that threatens the fork that, any decent player is going to stop the fork, and you just wasted time. And anyone who fell for the fork was going to fall for the fork later. So, like, in a meta sense, you've taken a step back in your overall win probability. So anyway, just a quick aside, because that is, if you just constantly are thinking about chess fundamentals when you're playing the opening, that's the important thing at the beginning level, in my opinion, not which opening you're playing. But what you say about the seductive aspect is definitely true. And again, chess is supposed to be fun, and like to pull off one of Eric Rosen's Stafford Gambit tricks, like, if that's what you enjoy most in chess, then there's totally nothing wrong with that. But it is, like, from a mathematical perspective, I agree with what Alex's data revealed, and I think a lot of people would find that. So anything else on openings before we go to the next question, Alex?
I think your point earlier around traps is really interesting. So, like, I'm a big fan of like Simon Williams' YouTube content. I think it's just funny. It's just like, it's funny to watch someone so good play stuff that's like sort of supposed to be objectively bad, and then beat people from what appears to be an objectively bad position. And I think there's one thing that doesn't, I think, apply at my level, but I think is like really interesting nonetheless, is just this sort of idea of like practical complexity versus like sort of theoretical complexity. And you said earlier, like, B3 doesn't have a lot of traps in it, and I think that that's one of the things that I appreciate, is because I think when you're in an ideal world, you'd basically, I think, be posing your opponent's problems, which are reasonably difficult to solve if you don't already know the answer, and if you can't solve them, create grave problems. But I find that the same happens to me just about as often as it happens to my opponents when I go for things that are incredibly sharp. And so I think that idea of like traps is super seductive, but probably, at least at my level, better to just try and avoid, because you sort of win as many games as you lose trying to take advantage of them, if that makes any sense. Whereas like Sam Williams can like play his way out of the like idiotic position that results. You just get beat. You know?
Yeah, I mean the Stafford Gambit in particular, it's developed like its own theory at the under 1500 level, you know, like because it's like all the Eric Rosen proteges are battling each other and developing like their own 11 moves of theory. And in any other opening, they're just, you know, fending for themselves in deep waters. So I definitely get what you're saying. But again, whatever people enjoy, I'm fully on board with. So let's get to the next question from Jack. So Jack asks, he says, it seems like your rating gains come in big chunks, it seems like rating gains come in big chunks followed by a relatively flat period and then another big jump. Do you feel like this is because it takes a while for a certain skill or knowledge to accumulate that simply makes you better than other players at a certain level? Or do you think it's a confidence issue of being able to believe you are better?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And I would encourage anyone who hasn't listened to it to go back and listen to Logazar's episode with you, because he talks a little bit about this as well. I don't quite I think I have like a similar experience, but I don't quite understand the sort of mechanisms. I don't quite understand the mechanisms of kind of what's actually happening there. I suppose like maybe the easiest sort of heuristic you could have as like what's going on is just, at least from a sort of pattern perspective, it's plausible to me that it takes time for your brain to develop like proper fluency in a pattern, but once it has developed that proper fluency in the pattern, you sort of immediately get the benefits of it, as it were. So like, you know, in a language context, it would be like, take some time before you can immediately summon the word in the right context whenever you need to summon the word in the right context. But then once you have, it's kind of there, right? And so, but it has almost like an absolute utility. It's like before you can summon the word in any context, it's you obviously can't use it in any context, and then once you can, you can. So it's like, yeah, I definitely experienced a similar thing, and I don't really understand exactly why, but I think it's probably something to do with like just like how well the information has been like assimilated into like the subconscious or something like that.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And I do think that there's probably a confidence element as well, but I echo what you say about not really knowing, but also my intuition is it's more based on sort of unknown, neuroscience reasons rather than confidence, but there's probably some interplay between the two.
I think maybe this touches on a point that people bring up a lot on your podcast, which is this sort of like memorization versus understanding. And I think in some sense it's like, you know, especially if you're doing lots of tactics puzzles on Chessable or other places, you know, I guess particularly on Chessable, it's like, oh, well, you're just memorizing things. Does that mean you actually understand them or not? And I think there's like an element to that, which is like kind of a moot point, which is like, there's probably a period where if you memorize 1,000 like with a queen mate in ones or whatever, there's probably a point where it's easier for your brain to memorize each individual puzzle than it is for it to understand the heuristic. But certainly once you get to 1,000, your brain's just going to understand how queen mate in ones work, right? Like it's easier for your brain to just be like, screw it, I'm going to learn the actual thing that I need to learn in order to be able to apply this across context. And so I think that like maybe this speaks to this memorization understanding point, which is like in the beginning, you're sort of like probably doing the action of, ideally through understanding, but you're probably like doing the action of memorization, but then like quickly you end up doing the action of understanding which is probably the more likely to transfer to like rating gains or whatever you want to call it.
Fake it till you make it, basically. Okay, we've got one more Patreon question, Alex, and this one is from Alex Friedman. And I'm based on your blog post, I think you'll have some good insights here. He says, "Hi, Alex. I'm much better at solving tactics than at not blundering during an actual game. What helped you improve in that? Was it just more tactics, or was it a different kind of work on your thought processes? Thanks."
Yeah, I mean, I guess this like comes back to the very beginning of the conversation, which is just like I'm sort of objectively still a pretty bad player. So I still blunder regularly in really like heinous, simple ways. So I don't necessarily think that I've solved this problem. But I would say that actually one thing that's really underrepresented, and I do think has helped me at least understand how not to blunder, is just like defensive puzzles. There's in the Susan Polgar series, the How to Learn Chess the Right Way, the third book is basically just defensive puzzles. And in the same way as like, you have to understand what a pin is, or like helps to understand what a pin is to be able to do pins. There's just loads of defensive concepts that I just like didn't understand until someone explained them to me, right? So I think I would really wholeheartedly recommend like actively trying to just work on like defensive orientated puzzles. It's much less fun, but they're also like much more difficult. And so I think there's something that's kind of like fascinating about, there's some, again, it's like something really seductive about the idea of like, getting really good at checkmating people, but it's much more difficult and in a way much more interesting to be able to understand, like, or to be able to put into words how not to get checkmated. I'm not necessarily very good at it, but I at least helps to have the vocabulary.
Yeah, and I was really glad to see you highlight that in your blog post, because I'm a big advocate of that, the third volume in Susan Polgar's series in particular. And of course, as I mentioned when I interviewed FM Peter Giannatos in his new book in Chessable course, Everyone's First Chess Workbook, he also has some defensive puzzles that are helpful. And the third resource, of course, as always, is the Chess Step workbooks. They have a blend of tactics and defensive puzzles, especially as you move up from step 2 to step 3, and so it goes. But I definitely agree that those are good resources, and you could try Alex F, who sent the email, incorporating some sort of checklist to try to sort of build a good thought pattern in terms of making sure that you spot your opponent's tactics as well as your own. But
right.
But it's a constant, it's just naturally more challenging for some reason.
I think one thing that I found really interesting in that book, which is also maybe like slight relief from the problem of like what happens when you blunder a piece, is that it spends some time on things like Levy calls like danger levels, or other sort of variations of these things, which like kind of get you out of the position from which you've blundered. And so I think like certainly when I started at chess, I was just like, oh god, I blundered a piece. Whereas like it's a really complicated game, and so often you can create enough complexity that the blunder goes away. Like not all the time, but at least some of the time. And so I feel like that was a major change in like how I thought about how I thought about what moves I could and couldn't play, I suppose, or once I blundered, whether I thought that the game was over, because it just teaches you how to create additional complexity such that maybe the game isn't completely over. Yeah.
All right. Well, Alex, this has been amazing. So many great insights. I think people will greatly enjoy this. I do have one more sort of broad question, as we start to wrap up, which is like, what's next? I mean, are you still full throttle, full steam ahead studying chess? And if so, like, what's your plan in terms of maybe competing and what resources you'll be using?
Yeah, so I am planning to, well, and I have done so far. I'm planning to do like a tournament every month, and then at the
Great.
moment I'm just doing like 20-30 minutes a day of tactics, um, and then I'm kind of just hoping that it will continue to work. Um, yeah, I presume that it will like taper off at some point, but like it doesn't feel like it's quite tapering off yet. So yeah, that's the plan. It would be really cool to be like objectively like good at chess. I would be really excited about that, but I'm also aware that like it seems quite unlikely from what from the outside view of like whether it's possible to do that when you're older. So we'll see.
I mean, I think it's doable. It's just you've got to invest in the process, and like it could be 10 years.
Right.
It's such a long road that it's better not to think about it too much, which it seems like is kind of the approach you're taking. But hearing you mention like 30 minutes a day, I feel like a lot of people who get bitten by the chess bug, like they just kind of plunge in and they're spending like 3-4 hours a day. So I'm just curious, is there like a life constraint or other interests, or like why not more? Not that I'm advocating, I'm more curious.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like, don't get me wrong, sometimes when I have more time, I do spend more time, usually just um, on games or something. But I think basically because the method that I use is really heavily focused around spaced repetition, you just get punished for spending more time like doing the thing that's actually useful. Like if I do an hour today, I just have to spend more time tomorrow, and I might not have time tomorrow. And so, there are like some ways around this to an extent, but like I guess like one of the disadvantages of Chessable is that they don't like allow you to put holiday days in and stuff like that. And so I don't want to be spending 3 hours a day on Christmas like doing chess, right? So
Right.
and I do have like other ways to spend more time in it. So I guess like if I have more time, like maybe it counts as maybe I was play some games or something, but I guess I just don't see that as like very useful or like at least it doesn't factor into like how I think about like practice, shall we say?
Okay. And have you done any offline learning? Have you read any paper books? I mean, obviously you're an avid reader, but chess wise,
No, I haven't. Is the short answer.
any what's the main reason?
I think like I think I have like I have very good evidence from chess and other things that I've learned through like similar methods for what works for me and what is sustainable. And I could kid myself that like reading would be one of those things, but I've just never really been one for reading books. And so it's just like, I guess I just know myself, right? Like I'm much more, I just know that I'm much more, although it's for many people very boring, like I'm just much more enamored with the like with like processes of like efficiency and like feeling like I'm able to do in 20 minutes what takes other people 2 hours. And unfortunately, like I know that it will take me 2 hours to read a book, like it will take other people 2 hours to read a book. And so it just doesn't feel quite as glamorous as the idea of, you know, taking a shortcut.
Gotcha. Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's good to know one's proclivities and sort of design a plan
I think
around it.
I think like it's funny because like there's a really interesting podcast. Let me find the name of it. Which is about games and the reasons that people play games, and essentially made the distinction in this podcast between like achievement orientated games and struggle-oriented games. And I think so. It's Sean Carroll's Mindscape: Science, Society, Philosophy, Culture, and Arts. And the interviewer is I might not say it right, but episode 169, Thai Nguyen, on games, art, value, and agency. And basically, I think just the thing that I love about this experience is like I started off being really bad. I'm still not good, but I feel like I'm able through like design of process to get better than my friends and stuff like that. And so I feel like there's part of it which sadly is like somewhat attributed to chess is a really amazing game and it's really fun to play. But there's part of it for me which is also just like I like the sensation of like being able to get better at things quickly and like to design a mechanism for doing that. So the game for me is not necessarily chess. The game for me is like, how can I become really good at this arbitrary thing to like simplify and satisfy my sense of ego, or whatever, right? And so I think that's why like I'm much more interested in a way in like the process and the knowledge.
Interesting. Yeah, and definitely that gets to why I think the aforementioned Elijah Logazar interview was one of your favorites. He's definitely so systematic and so well read on the topic of learning. So yeah, Alex, this has been amazing. You've got so many interesting thoughts about this. Any plans of like future blog posts or YouTube channels or any more content along these lines?
I might do a similar write-up on learning languages, and then like something kind of maybe more generalized in the sort of coming months, but like nothing specifically for chess. To be honest, I feel like almost embarrassed that I'm even here talking about chess, just given that like like 1,500 relative to the scope of the people that you have on this podcast is like kind of absurd. So I hope that the next chess blog I write will be one that actually earns my place amongst the at least the lower end of like there's like at least better than one person that you've had who regularly plays. So I think that'll be the next thing that I write about chess.
Well, from a chess strength point of view, you may be right, but I think that from anyone who's heard the interview, everyone will understand why we were privileged to have you on the podcast, because you've pulled together a lot of great observations about how to get better at this silly, beautiful game. For the aforementioned future blog posts, like Alex, is there a way to just subscribe to it? I know you have a Twitter account. What's the best way for people to keep up with anything else you may share?
I think my website has, if you go on alexcrompton.com, you can see random blogs that I do, or subscribe on your RSS reader. There's maybe like a form on there for subscribing to that, but otherwise, maybe just, unfortunately, I'm not very active on social media and stuff, so maybe just like check the website if you want. Okay. Or you can email me, which is alex@alexcrompton.com, and I'll give you the latest.
Great. I'm sure you'll get a few emails. And what do you have going on professionally right now, Alex? So you doing the digital nomad thing?
Not quite digital nomad. COVID definitely put a stop on that. So in 2019, I left Entrepreneur First, which was really good for a while. Did some some traveling, and then COVID happened, and settled in Amsterdam. But I think my COVID experience probably mirrored lots of other experiences where it just ruins the relationship with the place that you are in, because you spend all of your time in a cubicle in it. And so, I'm sort of like in between places at the moment. And professionally, so after EF, I did a startup, which sadly didn't work out. And I spend kind of now over the last few months, have spent my time kind of, I guess, like doing music, seeing friends. I'm back in London at the moment, where most of my friends are. So I guess I do a bit of consulting here and there, but I'm not like working full time or anything yet. Ideally, I'd like become a musician, but I'm sort of almost like reluctant to even say that out loud, because it's just, it's like saying I'd like to be the tooth fairy, but we'll see.
Yeah. Cool. What instruments do you play?
Well, I'm kind of mainly interested in writing songs, but I can play, I suppose, like the usual gamut of like guitar, piano, and like making things on computers.
Cool. Awesome. Well, good luck in everything, Alex. Music, chess, and everything else, languages, and the list goes on. This has been amazing. Look forward to see what you share next.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's genuinely, as I said, like both equal parts embarrassing and also just like I felt like it's something that I can. I mean, like, I wish chess was more popular, but at least amongst like one friend that I have, or maybe two friends that I have who also play, they'll think it's maybe the coolest thing that's ever happened in my life. So I'm very excited to be here.
Awesome. All right. Well, that's a good note to end on. Thanks, Alex. And we hope to catch up in the future.
Thanks very much.
Perpetual Chess is proud to be a member of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Be sure to check out their sports and pop culture related podcasts as well. I also, as always, would like to thank Matthew Passy for producing the show. Without Matthew, Perpetual Chess would not exist. And I want to thank everyone who listens to the show, whether it be on your own without telling anyone about it, keeping it secret, or if you're helping to spread the word, all the better, whether it be telling a friend about a particularly impactful interview, or whether it be writing a positive review online. All of that stuff helps get the word out and helps Perpetual Chess continue to grow. But most of all, of course, I want to thank those that provide financial support to Perpetual Chess. Without you all, Perpetual Chess would not be possible in its current form. And I would like to give special thanks to the following people and entities. Here comes the list. Chessable.com, David Lazarus of Lasman Chess, coach of Dave's Young Tigers on Lichess, Quality Chess Books, the Capital City Chess Club, the Abysmal Depths of Chess blog, Adaptive Interactive Web Designs and Services, the Apprentice Twitch channel, A Needy Deer, Austin Clough, Benjamin Porteau, Bill Sigler, Kathy Carr, Chad Oliver, the Charlotte Chess Center, the Chess Central's Chess blog, Chessmood.com, Chris Flanagan, Chris Lott, Dan O'Hanlon, Daniel He, Danny Davidson, David Mitchell. I am Dimitri Schneider, Douglas Wilson. I am Eric Rosen, Farhan Tharwar, Faraz Sawaf, Gary Foreman, Glenn Downing, Greg Harfst, Greg Shahadi, Gregory Golick, Hampus Axelson, James Kennedy, Jay Garrison, Jeff Martinson, Jeff Schaefer, Jeremy Nielsen, John Jernigan, John MacArthur, Kevin Forsyth, Kevin Gilmore, Kevin O'Callahan, Kevin Pryor, King Cell, the King's Crusher YouTube channel, the law offices of Stuart Katz, Matthew Feeney, Michael Can, FM Michael Oblin, Mr. Mike Shahadi, Michael Sullivan, the famous Mr. Dodgy, the Nerdnace Twitch channel, Perry McManus, GM Peter Prohaska, Peter Sodi, Philip Flummins, the Playmore Chess Academy of the Hamden Chess Club, Ray Lillywhite, Reuven Fisher, Rick Rivas, Robert Hansen, Ross Crossland, the Seattle Chess Club, Shane Unger, Stefan Kelty, Stephen Martinez, Sven Gierson, Thomas Tachenko, Todd Bryant of StrongChess.com, Todd Kennedy, The Vintage Patzers, which is a Chess.com improver group, Wayne Beam, and I also would like to thank the following: #ChessPunks, who are the adult improvers on chess Twitter, Ace Vallega, Adam Fowler, Adam Johansson, Adam Ralph of ChessEngland.com, Adrian Gutierrez, Al Hastings, Alan and Maggie Sue, Alex Pejas, Alexander Markovitz, Antonio Cancino, Antonio Leonfort, FM Andre Terakov, Dr. Andrew Perry, Angus McLeod, Barry Hessian, Bill Gruber, Bill Juniper, Bill Moran, Bill Trammell, Brad and Andy Rosen, Brandon Houseseed, Brian Chase, Brian Mullis, Bruce Scott, Bruno Johnson, Brian Tillis of Palm Beach Chess, Cameron Davis, Ken Kabadayi, Chad Hilton, Chad Likens, of Rose City Chess in Portland, the Chess Dojo, Chess for Charity Jacksonville, Chess Patzer Spain, Dr. Charles Snodgrass, Chris Kiefer, Chris Wainscott, Christopher Baumgardner, Christopher Chabris, Christopher Wood. I am Christoph Zalecki, aka Chess Explained, Coach Jay's Chess Academy, Costa Carras, Courtney Fry, Craig Mallon, Daniel Ginsberg, Daniel Naylor, Dave Best, Dave Saylor, David Blaskacek, David Brown, David Goris, David Hamblin, David Cramley, David Peterson, Dennis Parrish, FM Donnie Ariel, Dwayne Edmonds, Ed Daly, Ed Mead, Edwin Rodriguez, Eric Baldwin, Ethan Smith, Evan Rosenberg, Ewan Richardson, Ian Mason, Felipe Mayo Pereira, Fox Valley Chess Club, Francis Letarte Lavoie, Frank Tortoris, MD, Frank Zananes, Gary Andrews, Gary Lewis, Gautam Narula, Gene Stewart, George Foote, George Harris, Giovanni Russo, Gregory Higgins, Han Shute, Harish Srinivasan, Howard Vihan, Jacob Kovac, Jason Apollo, Jason Murray, Jacques Pari, James Aspinwall, James Bonastia, James Muir, Jason Woolham, Jay Tuttle, Jaydeep Chakrabarty, Jeff Anderson, Jeff Davis, Jeffrey Martello, Yep Hoyland, Jerry Wells, Jesse DeCumos, Jesse McNulty, Jim Jones, Jim Ratliff, Jim Sadler, Joe DeSano, Joe Valdez, Joel Thomas Ramos, John McAdams, John Tully, Juan Almaguer, Dr. John Fallon, John Fernandez, John Fontaine, John Hartman, John Jeffrey, John McMurtry, Jonathan Bannister, Jonathan Slater, John Quist, John Tully, Jose Rodriguez, Justin Gardner, Justin Goodfellow, Jen Shahadi, Joel Rocky, John Thompson, Grandmaster Josh Friedel, I am Kari Christensen, WGM Katerina Nemtsova, Kelly Palmer, Krishna Gopala Krishnan, Kyle McAvoy, Larry Cook, Larry Reiferth, Lars Wiesen, Macaulay Peterson, Maria Emilyanova, a.k.a. Photo Chess, Mark Chaves, Mark Fitzpatrick, Mark Miller, Mark Wilkins, Marko Butolovich, Martin Knudsen, Martin Krug, Matt Ferrari, Matthew Coughlin, Matthew Tedesco of SeattleChessMeetup.org, Matthias Plock, Mechanics Institute Chess Club of San Francisco, Michael Allard, Michael Hudson, Mike Clem, Mitchell Fabian, Nate Goebel, Nate Solon, Neil Bruce, Nigma Malajanov, Nicholas Isabel, Olaf Mueller-Michaels, Pablo Davila, GM Pascal Charbonneau, Passy Passanen, Paul Bain, Paul Clarkson, Paul Eckert, Paul Swaney, Paulo Santana, Peter Lux, Queenside Management Limited in Switzerland, Randall Montgomery, Randy Temple, Ricky Grijalva, Richard Hallenbach, Richard McCormick, Richard Tucker, Robert Callahan, Robert Turner, Robert Wall, Robert Wilson, Rory Coleman, Ryan Berg, Samson Teaches Chess, Satyajit Malagu, the Say Chess YouTube channel and publishing empire, Scott McKinnon, Scott Rose, Sean Krause, Sebastian Finsterwater, Sergei Makagon, Seth Ruzica, Seth Will, Sean Tracy, Silver Knights in Richmond, Simon Schmidt, Stefan Roller, Stephen Miller and Tom George, WGM Tatyev Abrahamian, Terry King, Thomas Brown, Tim Brennan of TacticsTime.com, Tim Seymour, Timothy Ha, FM Timothy Wall, Tobiah Rex, Tom Edsel, Tommy Farron, Tony Rotella, Tyron Price, Victor Beauchamp, William Brock, William Peterson, FM Zhao Cheng of Chess1000.com, Zachary Hoskin, and Zhivko Stoyanov. Thanks for listening, everyone.